idea of millivolts and membrane potentials. But they vary between the myogenic cells and the contractile cells, and that's just ridiculous, not necessary trivia. Unless you go into cardiology in an RN capacity, then you can memorize the individual membrane potentials. What I do want you to understand, though, is the change in the membrane potential, the ions responsible in which direction across the membrane those ions are going to create whatever membrane potential value we've got. Then keep in mind also that there's a difference between skeletal muscles and cardiac muscles in the fact that skeletal muscles need a stimulus to contract. They need a neurotransmitter to land on them. And I can send repeated skeletal muscle contractions, and they can build upon each other, creating more tension, up to the fact that I can even create tetany, where I get a locked up spasm of a muscle contraction. That's because of the very short duration of its refractory, the blue barred portion of our screen here. Cardiac has a much, much longer lasting refractory period that prevents tetany from happening. You actually allow the contraction to complete itself, so you can't build upon the next one. Okay, now we're going to do this in two phases. Tonight we're going to look at the parts of an ECG. On Monday or next Wednesday, once you've gotten used to the idea of membrane potentials and what this is, we'll look at some idiosyncrasies and some more information about what it can actually tell you. Tonight, all I want you to get from this is, first of all, the major parts of an ECG. And that is going to be the P wave. And during the P wave, we get atria depolarizing. And this is looking at all of the electricity moving through the heart. It is not a single action potential. So it's looking at the overall effect of all the contractile cells and all of their action potentials happening at once. And what we see is the very first, what's called deflection, the first rise, is corresponding to when the atria are depolarized. Now, the atrial contractile cells, they're depolarizing. So you're thinking, okay, atrial depolarization, oh, that would be that part. All right, so they're doing this right there. And then there's a period of time where there is no change in the membrane. I'm sorry, there's no change in the millivolts of my ECG. So you have the P wave, it flattens out. Then we get what's called the complex of the Q, R, and S. So the QRS complex. And during this QRS complex, you get the ventricles to depolarize. The ventricles will depolarize during the QRS complex. It's not a wave, it's a complex. It's got three parts. All right, so the atria depolarized during the P wave. Then I get the QRS complex, where the ventricles depolarize. Then I get the T wave, where the ventricles are repolarizing. And we're thinking about really the contractile cells. You're kind of thinking about this action potential when we use the words depolarize, repolarize, and plateau. See how the plateau is basically kind of a flat line where there's no change? Well, that's what's happening right there. That's the plateau for the atrials, and this is the plateau for the ventricles. And this whole thing of P to the QRS to the T lasts 800 milliseconds. That is one cardiac cycle. From the beginning of the P wave to the end of the T, getting ready to the next P, right? From here to here, we start all over again. It's 800 milliseconds, which is 8/10 of a second. For right now, do not worry about the intervals or the segments. Right? I try to teach layering effect. All right? So you first learn the major parts of an ECG, what happens in those three major parts. We mentioned atria depolarizing. We mentioned ventricles depolarizing. We mentioned ventricles repolarizing. Did I leave anything out? Yeah. The atria repolarizing. Where do they do it? They do it during the QRS complex. But since the atria are so fewer in cells compared to the number of cells for the ventricle, it's being outcompeted. The ventricle's more like shout, and the atria more like whisper. And so it's doing it, you just can't see it. It's being overridden by the depolarization of the ventricles. So this is happening while the atria are trying to repolarize. You just really can't see it. Now, what they're not showing you on here, but they kind of did it up here, is that there's time happening along this. So those of you that have actually worked with ECGs on tapes or screens, right, as a tape comes out of the machine, you're watching time pass. You want to keep that in mind for next Monday or next Wednesday. We're timing how fast the signal goes from the atria to the ventricles, how fast the ventricles depolarize, how the signal of the plateau lasts, and how fast they repolarize. And we're going to look at what happens if you elongate or shorten these things on Monday and Wednesday. All right? Keep in mind that it is not a single action potential. It is the electrical change of the heart itself overall. And don't forget, the heart is a three-dimensional structure. So you've got front and back, up and down. Right? You've got X, Y, and Z axes. So it travels through the entire heart tissue. And we're measuring the electricity traveling toward leads and away from leads. It is not an action potential by itself. It is just the passage of the electrical signal through the heart tissue. What you're mainly looking at is the effects of the contractile cells. Now, I mentioned that of your heart, only 1% is actually myogenic cells. That means 99% are contractile cells. That means their action potentials are a lot louder than the little whispers of the myogenic. So really, you're just simply looking at the passage of all those action potentials as a group effect passing through the heart, from the atria to the ventricles, and starting all over again. And this is going to be one set of blood ducts. All right, don't memorize this. All right, we're going to come back to this one because there's some vocabulary in here that we not yet have talked about. It's more about cardiac functioning. And you do not need to make an association of what's happening in terms of isovolemics and ventricular ejections right now. Once we've talked about how this stuff happens, we're going to come back and look at this and see how it makes a lot more sense. All right? But I wanted to put it right next to the previous one. So let's talk about the blood moving through the heart. Think about what diffusion is. Right? The spontaneous movement of a substance from regions of higher to regions of lower. You guys always think about it in terms of ions or chemicals. But it also applies to pressure, fluid pressure, or in other words, blood pressure. Blood will go from one place to another because it's going from a region of higher pressure to a region of lower pressure. It's always going from higher pressure to lower pressure. Just keep that in mind. Now, we have some vocabulary. We have the word systole, right, which is the word for the heart contracting, means building pressure. Then we have diastole, which is relaxation, in which the pressure will be dropping. So we're going to build pressure and drop pressure. Build pressure and drop pressure. How does that work? All right, here's a little sketch of the valves of the heart. Those who have already had labs, this will be a little more familiar to you. Those that haven't had labs yet, we'll look at them tonight. But what they're looking at is a cross-section of your heart, and there I can see the choroidal tendineae and the papillary muscles. The red arrow shows the flow of blood from the atria into a ventricle. Now, structurally, this is a one-way valve. Like that door is right there. Right? I can push that door to leave the room. But if I try and come into when I push, is the door going to open? No, it's built, you have to pull it open, right? This door is built for one-way easy flow. So was this valve. It's designed to let blood go from the atria into the ventricle. But as soon as blood tries to go from the ventricle and push on the underside of those valves, it ends up pushing the two valves together and it seals the door shut. It prevents blood mechanically from going back into the atria. These are one-way valves. They allow blood to go from the atria into the ventricle, but they prevent the backflow of blood from ventricles back into the atria because of the way they're mechanically built. Same for the semilunar valves in the pulmonary trunk and aorta. All right? Here's blood leaving, let's say, the right ventricle, right, going into the pulmonary trunk. Well, those of you that I showed in the lab this evening, right, like the kangaroo pouches, we're pushing the valve to lay flat against the pulmonary trunk. That allows blood to freely leave and go toward the lungs. But the first drop of blood that begins to now flow backwards will catch the lip and make it billow out, and we've got 3 of those valves. Now they balloon them like a parachute, and now they've sealed the passage shut. That's another mechanical preventing of blood flowing back into the ventricles. Both of these are mechanically designed for the one direction flow of blood. Realize these guys have chordae tendineae to prevent the backflow. So the reason these flaps don't flap back up into them is because they're anchored, which they're not showing you, by the chordae tendineae. They're keeping the flaps from flipping inversely and going back into the atria. Right? So mechanically, one-way valves. We'll revisit that in a second. Let's watch a cardiac cycle or walk through it. You are not to memorize what happens at each step, so do not commit this to memory. I'm more concerned with the process of why things happen, and can you tell me what happens in step 3? Okay? So let's walk through this step by step in an understandable pathway for why blood leaves one chamber and goes into the next. Let's start here. Pink indicates contraction. Right? That'd be after your P wave of an ECG if you want for a moment. Atria are squeezing blood and pushing it into the ventricle. Well, that's going to allow the tricuspid and bicuspid valves, right, to open because it's a one-way valve, right? It's these guys, right? They're designed to let blood come in. So that's no big deal. But why is there blood going from this chamber into here? Because there's more pressure of blood here than there is pressure of blood here. There's higher pressure there and lower pressure here. And blood goes from region of high pressure to region of low pressure. All right, so blood moves through. Then I'm now going to begin to contract the ventricles. Now look at the black arrows. Are they crossing a valve? No, they're pointing at it, right? But these guys are crossing through the valves, indicating flow through the valve. It's only pointing towards it. So why isn't the blood going from the right ventricle back into the atria? Because the valves are closed. That's a one-way valve, right? They're made to not let that happen, right? They're these guys, right? They're made to seal shut. So no matter how much pressure you create, blood will not go back into the atria. Well, why isn't blood going through these valves? Because I thought those guys were designed to let blood actually leave the ventricle and go into the pulmonary trunk or the aorta. Well, the golden rule is blood goes from regions of higher pressure to regions of lower pressure or less pressure. So if blood is not crossing the valve, what does that mean about the pressure on the other side of that valve? There's higher pressure. There's resistance, right? So yes, the ventricles are contracting. They're building pressure. Well, that seals these guys shut, but apparently it's not enough pressure yet to overcome the blood that's in there. So I need to continue to contract and build the pressure up inside. That's what's happening here, right? Look at the dimple you get right there compared to right here, right? So now we've contracted even more. I've built up enough pressure now where now I can pop open the semilunar valve because now there's more pressure here than there is pressure there. let's go back to that previous slide for a second. You have a contraction here. We're building pressure, but I'm not losing any volume of blood. There's still the same amount of blood in here. So this is what's known as an isovolemic or isovolemic contraction. All right, break the word down. Iso means like an isotonic solution. What would that be? Same concentration, right? Volume, same volume, contraction. The ventricles are contracting, but there's no change in the volume of blood. And we can see that right here. Because they're contracting, but nobody's crossing the valves. Then I finally build enough pressure to get blood ejection. I can now eject the blood out because there's more pressure in the ventricles than there is in the trunk. All right? And again, why isn't blood coming from the atria going into the ventricles? Because there's more pressure here than there is there. Now the ventricles are going to relax. Right? Look what happens to the flow of blood. It goes back against the semilunars. Well, they're built to not let that happen, right? They're made to seal shut. That makes total sense. These are mechanically designed to not let blood go back into the ventricles. But these are designed to let blood come into the ventricles. How come there's no blood coming in here? What's the rule? Blood only goes from regions of higher to regions of lesser. That must mean that the pressure here is still greater than the pressure in the atria. So now the ventricles are relaxing, but there's no change in volume again. That's another isovolemic, but now it's isovolemic relaxation.
How can there be more pressure on the ventricles than like the aortic or the pulmonary trunk if there's no blood there right now?
Oh no, there is blood.
So, okay.
Right, so let's try it in this next part. So the blood that's in here is being pushed out, but not all the blood leaves. Only about half of it is going to be leaving. And we have an actual diagram to show you that volume concept in a second. All right? So let's go back to here for a second. Ventricles are relaxing. They keep relaxing. Now they've relaxed enough for the pressure to drop enough. Now that allows the passive filling of blood from the atria into the ventricles, because now there's more pressure here than there is in there. And that allows the one-way doors to open. Of course, blood isn't going this way because they're designed not to let that happen. And then we simply just start all over again, which is what this is all about. Right? It's all about building pressure to go through one-way valves, building pressure to seal off the valves, and needing to create enough pressure where I can actually open up the next set of valves. Then I go through a relaxation phase. And this is a cardiac cycle. What I do want you to get is that A, blood goes from one section to the next because of pressure differences, always higher to lower. Keep that in mind. Look at which valves, oops, let's do it this way. Which valves are mechanically resisting blood flow, and which valves are pressure resisting blood flow, at what part of the cycle, and the whole thing lasts 800 milliseconds.
Say that one more time.
So you're looking at, the reason blood's not going back here is they're mechanically designed not to let that happen, right? But why isn't blood opening up that set? Because they're mechanically designed to let blood go, but there's not enough pressure here yet. There's still too much resistance on that side. So it's a resistance issue when the blood tries to go this way. But if you think about it in that context, let's go back to, here we go. Now we're back to a mechanical resistance, no longer a pressure resistance. That depends upon which way the blood's flowing through the valve. It's either a mechanical or a pressure resistance. Okay? Last little bit. We'll go a couple minutes over, and then we'll also revisit this on Monday again. This is a graph that shows two things at once. The concept of volume and the concept of pressure in the left ventricle. Look at the x-axis, right? Ventricular volume. Look at the diagram and realize at no point is there zero blood in the left ventricle. The minimum amount is 65 mils, right? So when you're looking at this idea right here, right, there's still 65 mils of blood in the ventricles. I have passive filling and then a bit of an atrial contraction to top off the ventricles. That means the ventricles normally have 135 mils of blood in them before they begin to contract. Here the ventricle has pressure on this side of the graph. So there's pressure here and there's volume over here. I can see I have 135 milliliters of blood and just a little bit of pressure, maybe what, 20 or 15 millimeters of mercury. But now I can see from point B to point C that the pressure is building, right? Because the line's going up. But is there any change in blood volume?
No.
No. So there's your isovolemic contraction. Same volume during a contraction. That's because the ventricles have not yet created enough pressure to pop open the semilunar valves. This section right here is this part of our diagram right here, right? They're contracting, but no blood is crossing the semilunars, and of course they can't cross the AVs because they're one-way valves. I finally build up enough pressure where now I get ejection. Well, how much blood do we actually eject out of the left into the aorta? Well, according to the graph, once I build up enough pressure, I pop open the AV valve, right? And now there's the loss of blood volume, but I'm still building pressure in the left ventricle. I keep ejecting the blood out until I stop ejecting. Now the ventricles begin to relax, because I can see their pressure is dropping as I follow the line of the graph, but it's always in line with 65 mils. So now we have the pressure dropping, but no change in blood volume. So another isovolemic, but now it's the relaxation part. So ventricles building pressure to overcome resistance of the semilunar valves. Ventricles relaxing, and no blood's coming into them because they still have more pressure than the atria do. And so we finally get to total relaxation. Now the atria dribble blood in, atria contract, and top the tank off. So we go from a low of 65 mils to a high of 135 mils. I then contract, eject the blood out, and I go from 135 down to 65. And for those math geniuses, that's 70 mils. That's your stroke volume. That is how much blood is ejected per contraction. You pump out 70 mils. You have 130 in there. You only pump out 70. And if you're a business person, you think, well, that's a waste. Why not use all of it? So let me ask you this. So I was fly fishing, just got back a little while ago from Idaho. Spent 4 weeks fly fishing, and last week I was in what's called Silver Creek National Conservancy. I was fly fishing. It's crystal clear water, knee deep. I was wet wading, didn't need waders. I'm having a good time trying to catch this fish that will not pay attention to me at all. And I hear slosh, slosh, plop, plop. I look up the river and go, oh shit. Hi, Mom. It was a cow, moose, with her baby. And in the woods and the willows, I can barely see, was this huge frickin' set of antlers. That was a bull. That was his mate. That was his young. That was about 15 yards away. I did not stick around to introduce myself. How did I get the necessary blood to allow me to run out of the creek? I can't make more blood quickly. When you go from being at rest to an explosive activity and your muscles need more blood, where can I get the more blood from? I've got 65 mils I can tap into. I still got half the blood in my heart. all you got to do is contract harder to push more of the blood out. And that's where you get the reserve for explosive activities from rest to like an escape issue, getting away from towels and bowls. All right? Now, I'm a little bit over, so let me just summarize this and we'll revisit this on Monday. This whole thing is about watching two things happening in the left ventricle. Changes in blood volume and also at the same time watching the pressure change. You have two phases of the contraction, relaxation period, where there is no actual change in volume. Those are called isovolemics. Iso means same, volemic means volume. You have an isovolemic contraction because the ventricles have not made enough pressure yet to pop open some of the valves. And then we have an isovolemic relaxation because the pressure in the ventricles is still greater than the pressure in the atria. So they can't let their blood come in. Until they finally relax enough where now blood can come into them, and this is now my filling stage. This is going from 65 mils up to 135. That'd be this part right here. Okay? Now, on Monday, we're going to start here. We're going to look at the things that affect heart rate and then the things that affect stroke volume. But there are two variables that influence stroke volume. One is called EDV, which is the end diastolic volume. Another is called ES, which is the end systolic. These are the two variables of stroke volume, and stroke volume and heart rate affect cardiac output. We're going to revisit those on Monday. All right? Don't forget that we're starting to open labs this coming Saturday. So I will be here from 10 to 3 this Saturday. So have a part tonight's lecture. But Tuesday doesn't make sense after you read the book, you've gone through your notes. Come see me and I'll help you on Saturday. Those that have lab coming up, give me 10 minutes, I'll meet you in lab. Every Saturday. Yep. No Sundays though.